you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to the Ag Committee. Continue to appreciate your service to this country. My first question, let's go back to Prop 12. I appreciate your answers before. As you know, California's Proposition 12 is another costly regulation. It would seem to me that if you're a larger company, that you could overcome these hurdles a little bit easier than a small packer could. In the pork industry, we see a company like Smithfield, which dominates 25% of the packing, and they're able to overcome all these regulations. They're big enough that they can handle other regulations, that the overregulation continues to lead to consolidation of industries, no more well seen than in the packing industry. What effect do you think Prop 12 has on independent pork producers who can't afford to comply, and is this going to drive further consolidation?
I think this is the reason why we have invested in expanded processing capacity at the local level, Senator. Yeah. Between our efforts to expand market and additional processing, nearly 400 projects have been funded, and we expect more to be funded in the next several months. This is part of building out a local and regional food system so that you're not at the whim of a handful of large-scale facilities or at the whim of a policy that you have a hard time complying with.
Thank you. Should Congress act to prevent the proliferation of laws like Prop 12 across the country?
You know, I think you got to provide some clarity and consistency. Having said that, I don't envy your capacity to do it. It's not going to be easy to craft that.
Thank you. To your point earlier, though, it's hard to have one producer to comply with 50 different states on how we're supposed to raise a heifer in Kansas. Yeah. So let's talk about disaster assistance for a second. Obviously, Kansas coming off back-to-back years of drought, and we've had to apply for more disaster assistance. And we probably got more complaints about the response and the rollout of this latest round of disaster assistance than any other one issue in the last several years. Specifically, we were seeing some small absentee landowners were getting disaster assistance at a greater per acre rate than our full-time farmer families were. And this progressive way of doing this seems to be very complicated. It seemed to be very slow. I would ask you to consider abandoning this progressive payment factor in the future.
Senator, it's interesting because I'm looking at the numbers for Kansas. 45,132 of your producers got more money as a result of this progressive factor. 10,217 got less. So 82% of your producers actually benefited from this effort. Having said that, the way to avoid this, Senator, is very simple. Provide the resources fully and completely for the disaster. It was a $10 to $12 billion disaster. We told Congress that. You all gave us a little over $3 billion.
We actually gave you $3.7 billion, which I think was more than adequate to cover the situation. I think it's unfair to punish those just because they have more acres. Let's move on to the next question here. Okay, let's go talk about the Packers and Stockyards Act. I'm not sure if we've got to cover that topic today yet. In June of 2021, USDA stated, and I quote, "The USDA will propose a rule to clarify that parties do not need to demonstrate harm to competition in order to bring an action," end of quote, under certain provisions of the Packers and Stockyards Act. This rule is now at the Office of Management and Budget for final review before it's proposed. I point out that 8 federal appeals courts have already affirmed that the Packers and Stockyard Act requires a person to demonstrate harm to competition. Certainly, we have over 60 livestock organizations nationwide that oppose this rule because it hurts their livestock producers. So here's the question. Is it still the position of the USDA that you can implement a rule that would be a blatant violation of circuit court precedent by not requiring harm to competition to bring an action under the Packers and Stockyards Act?
Well, the rule itself hasn't been finalized, Senator. So I think obviously we have to take into consideration any litigative risk associated with the rule in crafting it. I think you're going to see more activity from Packers and Stockyards before that rule is available for folks to look at. I think there's still work that we need to do on the poultry tournament system. I think there's more work we have to do to avoid discrimination and retaliation to producers, and I think you'll see those rules coming forward relatively soon. I think there's still work to be done, and we're continuing to do work on the rule that you mentioned. And I think it is obviously appropriate for us to craft it in a way which we believe responds to any of the concerns that courts have raised in the past.
I'm digesting that answer. So you don't feel that if it has this harm to competition, it's almost a double negative on me here. Do you think it's in violation of the circuit court precedent by not requiring harm to competition to bring an action under the Packers and Stockyards Act?
I think it's incumbent upon us to craft it in a way that responds to whatever concerns have been raised by courts in the past to avoid those problems, and at the same time to provide a more balanced marketplace for producers and
Thank you.
integrators.
Thank you. I think I would just close by making a comment that if we want to guarantee affordable food, access to affordable food for everybody, we're spending plenty of money on the back end, but I'm concerned as we work on a farm bill going forward that we're not spending enough money on the front end to make sure that our farmers are able to plant next year's crop. That's not really a question, it's just a statement. Thank you so much. I yield back.